Now we have a hard discussion to bite on for the morning with our Kickstarter, consolidating constitutional and electoral reforms, re-establishing democracy with constitutional reforms. For us as a country, Uganda, we have been undergoing a turbulent constitutional history, having in effect 4 constitutions since our independence in 1962. Now, the constitution-making process has not always followed the rules of the book as concerns democratic representation, causing as a result non-observancy of or at worst complete abrogation or disregard of the constitution, in effect leading to the country into a confusing democratic state. Now, the relation between parliament and the executive branch is the core issue, and the phenomenon of parliament as opposition in Uganda is also detailed in between there. The process of democratization in Uganda is evaluated in this context, but also we look at the relationship between democratization and development being assessed. Well, I do have experts with me in studio this morning, and they have engaged with this conversation back and forth, year in, year out. Electoral cycle in, electoral cycle out. Some on national level, we have one of our panelists on a regional level, and so they'll be giving us their 2 cents on the matter by and large. I am Priscilla Regina Nalwoga. Now, starting with my extreme left, we do have Sarah Bireete, who is a political analyst, and she is seated next to Marion Chilirabo, who is a lawyer, and we also do have Sheikh Kassim Kamugisha, who I need to ask, why are you here and not there back home?
I'm here as a lawyer.
Your new deployment. I've always been excited that one day I'll be having to talk to you over Zoom in your new address, but he's here in a legal capacity. I'm going to allow them the salutations, and then we'll get on with the conversation, starting with my immediate left.
Thank you, Priscilla. Good morning, viewers. Good morning, Uganda. Kassim Kamugisha. Sheikh is my name.
Okay, Marion.
Good morning, viewers. Sarah Marion is my name, and I'm happy to be here.
Good morning, viewers. I'm glad to be back on NTV show.
Okay, Sarah, I'll start with you to give us, an outlook of our constitutional and electoral reforms as they stand today.
Well, it's a depressing conversation for several reasons. But first, constitutionalism can only thrive when 3 components exist. One is a critical mass of citizens that are knowledgeable about the Constitution and are ready to defend it. Mm-hmm. The second component is a belief by majority actors, especially the political actors, in the Constitution, but also determination of these actors to defend the Constitution, and the presence of organized forces that cannot allow anybody to act contrary to the Constitution. And the same spirit is enshrined in our Article 3 of the Constitution, calling upon citizens to always prevent any force from contradicting the Constitution. But when you look at the knowledge, how many citizens really know the Constitution and are ready to defend it? I think that's our greatest challenge. Yeah. And this is what has given advantage to the political actors to abuse the Constitution. So Uganda's constitutional journey has been very turbulent and depressing, and many people had thought that with the enactment of the 1995 Constitution, the spirit of the Constituent Assembly, never again, never again. People had thought that we would not find ourselves, for example, in a stalemate for political transition, in a stalemate for electoral reforms. And if I may go direct to the electoral reforms, we have a Supreme Court decision in the Amama Mbaba's case that directed the enactment of 8 specific reforms arising out of, several electoral petitions, but specifically the Amama Mbaba's petition. Some of these reforms have been enacted, like extension of time within which to petition, from the Magezi bill, the piecemeal that was picked to escort the removal of age limit. But the rest of the critical reforms, especially two, have been neglected by the regime. And one of them is the issue concerning participation of public servants in our elections, specifically RDCs and the army, and the way they, disrupt our electoral processes. The Supreme Court ordered for specific punishment for people who are prohibited from participating in partisan politics. But this has not been done, and it's deliberate, and we know the beneficiary of this violation. The second issue that has not been enacted is regulations for use of technology in elections. From 2011, we have been having use of technology in elections, but with no legal framework. And this affects matters of evidence. For example, in the same petition, Mama Mbaba's petition, people had demanded for the backup of voting data. And the Electoral Commission never had this backup. But if you go to the laws, you find that there is no requirement, there is no basis, there is no definition of what extent can we use technology in our elections, and people pick and choose what to do, and even hide critical evidence, like backup of how people voted, which should have determined who was the winner in that election petition. And nobody produced it yet. It exists. Because you cannot use technology, and then you say technology has no backup. So these are some of the critical things that would change our terrain. But we also have several, critical reforms that we need. For example, we need to look at election financing, campaign financing. We have high level of commercialization of politics, and I know that there's the Elections Integrity Summit opening in Kampala today for Africa, but the key critical issue affecting elections overall in Africa, and maybe even in the global north, is the issue of commercialization of politics. How much money do you use? Are we having billionaires? For example, even in the US, there is the issue of how much money should one use. You could have billionaires determining the election through political advertising and manipulation of data. So how far are we ready to determine? In our elections last time, we had some of the people using, for example, about 2 billion in a parliamentary race. What are you buying? Is it an auction? So how much money should one use?
Where are you getting it from?
Yes, and what is the source of this money? You use 2 to 5 billion in a parliamentary election. Really, if you want to invest, why don't you go into private sector and start a business? And this is what later results into corruption. Because how do you get back that money that you are investing in elections? And what are you intending to do with 2 billion, 3 billion in a parliamentary race? And I know many people have saved so much money to use in this election.
Or they're even taking loans to be able to prepare themselves for the cycle.
Yeah, something like that. So we have also another challenge of transparency in the transmission, tabulation, and announcement of presidential elections. We have opaqueness at the National Tally Center, which is accessed by limited people, mainly the security personnel and ambassadors. You don't find other Ugandans and the election observers in the National Tally Center, but also the manner in which presidential elections are transmitted, tabulated, and announced is not transparent. And that's why we have contestations of who has won, where, which results, manipulation of elections. So when you have such elements happening in the elections, then you cannot talk of free and fair elections.
All right. Let me bring in Marion here, one who has been able to observe and interact, especially with the Constitution. And given the fact that in paper and in writing, there's guidance here and by, especially when it comes to constitutionalization. And so it begs the question, is constitutionalization still a thing for us in Uganda? Is it still the way to have the democracy that we deserve and yearn to have, and the good governance that we envision our country to be having today?
Well, it is still the only way that we can have good governance. But like Dr. Bireete said, the issue is that it's only a piece of paper until the citizenry or the actors give it life. laws are only pieces of paper until those supposed to implement them give them life. I'll take, for example, let me say countries that have come in defense of their constitution. It's not that anyone's constitution is better. Some of the democracies that we look up to, for example, the US, have also had challenges with leaders who would want to stretch the boundaries of their mandate under the law and go as far as, example, challenge a free and fair election through an almost coup. I think we saw the assault on the Capitol when Trump rejected the elections. But the thing is that how strong is the belief of the citizenry, but also the actors, judiciary, parliament, let me say in countries like ours on the African continent, the military, what is the respect that they have for this piece of paper? Do they believe that the principles and values that are entrenched in this piece of paper represent them, and therefore they are worth defending and fighting for? We saw in Burundi when Kabila tried to extend his term of office, how people came up and they were like, no, your time is done, please step aside so that a new president, we can have new leadership coming in. So it depends on how much is the people's attachment to this piece of paper. But also, yes, like Doctor said, what do the people know that this paper actually exists, or do they feel that this paper can actually protect them? So I think for me that is what is missing. But also I think we have to take in mind that most of these laws and this regime, this legal regime, is very alien to Africans and Ugandans as a whole. I think the other thing we need to do as maybe legal scholars is rethink the legal regime in a whole. These legal dogmas that even if you are to say that you're going to translate, for example, the constitution in your local language, how are you going to explain how the separation of powers, how are you going to explain to someone how it works? Or how are you going to explain some of these legal maxims? Because they're in Latin to start with. So, translating them from Latin to English to Luganda per se. So I think we also need, perhaps we have also been lazy as legal scholars not to reimagine like concrete things that are not, and we call it decolonizing the legal system as a whole. How do we make it more African? How do we make it more palatable to the African mind and see, like it was before, we did as societies in our small tribes have and kingdoms have certain laws that were easy for us to suggest. Even you go to a home and you know that this is the law of the land. So how do we make sure that even let me say a 13-year-old child in a home can tell you that this is the law of the land? When you break this law, these are the repercussions. And I think it comes to reimagining what makes sense to us as Africans. I think that is very important. Besides even from that is where the attachment to defend the constitution comes from. Okay, I think, in my view.
All right, rethinking the legal regime. You've given us the example of a child in a home setting, but many a times you only know the mistake you've committed or the crime you've committed
until the police come through.
At the time of committing it, not aware that before this kind of act, or expression is considered a crime within your community or even in your homestead. But rethinking legal regimes has been one of those debates. Sheikh Kassim, 2019, we did have the Constitution Amendment Bill that was introduced in Parliament, and it was seeking to restart presidential term limits, which Bajikwatako earlier on, and then seeking to also to remove army representation from Parliament, which seems to be increasing. And then you also do have the restriction of the number of ministers, who have also increased by a leap and a frog, among other changes. However, it did expire in the 10th Parliament's tenure, and there's not been any step of action that has been taken in that regard. And yet here we are having constitutional reform talks, when the places where the action should be taking place continue to ignore these recommendations.
A constitution is a living document that is a subject of amendments to cure a mischief at a certain time. And so I want to agree with Sarah that, Dr. Sarah, that our constitution since 1962 has undergone through turbulent times. You have 62, you have some reform, whereby the Queen is an amendment comes in, then you have Sideward Mutesa as the president, then you have 66. You have reforms there which were piecemeals, then 67 you have reforms. Even between 71 and 79, though we didn't have a constitution, but there were also reforms. Then you come to 1995, we have a CA. 8th October, we have a constitution 1995, which has also undergone amendments. 2003, you have an amendment which was to look at the quorum of parliament in passing bills. Then you have 2005 amendments which were about multi-party dispensation, which we didn't have. Then you have the law being brought in, you have Prime Minister's office, Attorney General. Then you have 2015, then you have 2017. So as you said, 2019, there is a discussion of having the military out of parliament, reducing the number of ministers. And yes, these could be matters to critically look at as a governance. And but is it what Ugandans really want? To me, that would be the underlying question. Because what Ugandans want outside is service delivery. So the fundamental question should be the presence of military or the UPDF in parliament. Has it undermined service delivery for the people of Uganda? The large number of ministers, has it undermined service delivery, the people of Uganda? And our preamble of the Constitution is very, very touching. It always refers back to the history, where we came from, 1962 up to today. What have we gone through as a country? If we know what we have gone through, maybe it could be the history mandating or calling for the military to be in parliament. What we went through could be the reason why we have a large number of ministers. What we went through could be the reason why, for example, the parliament is as big as it is. And so, whereas we have to principally agree that we need reforms in the Constitution, but we also have to keep in mind that our history guarantees some of these that we are talking about here. However, my thinking and the thinking of Ugandans is that the 1995 Constitution has also made strides within our governance. For example, as it came in, we had an executive which was in total overshadow of all other arms of government. But you have the Constitution which brings in the executive, legislature, judiciary, that counter each other. So, then of course you have instances where the executive was appointing and there are no checks and balances. But today you have got a parliament which checks the appointments of the president. So I agree that we need these reforms, but is it what Ugandans are saying, or these are voices of a few scattered individuals in the country? And if Ugandans are saying so, then we have a process we go through. For example, 2005, there was a referendum. Are Ugandans saying that we have to go for a referendum? Are some of these articles we are talking about entrenched? Because they are articles which cannot be touched in the Constitution. That to touch them, we need to go back to Ugandans, subject them to an election, and they decided to say that, yes, I think we don't need UPDF in the parliament, we don't need ministers who are as big as they are. So the discussion is not to be into the hands of few individuals. It should be a discussion that is agreed upon by Ugandans vis-a-vis what they expect from the governance. Two, if the army is in the parliament, has it in any way sabotaged any roles of parliament? Because parliament has got rules which are very clear. Legislation, that's number one. Number two, budget allocation. Number three, supervision. So if the army is in parliament, at what point has it sabotaged any of these? So that we begin to think about having the army outside parliament. Or if the army is in parliament, does parliament discuss matters, for example, of military? Yes, if they are discussed, who would be there to give guidance in matters of military? So it's a discussion which has to be, not to be rushed very quickly. It's a discussion which has to be studied and subjected to our history, subjected to aspirations of the Ugandans, and then given perspective in terms of where we have to be as a country in constitutionalism.
Okay. I know that Sarah has some responses to share, especially on the question, is military really an issue, when he has outlined out the basic requirements and responsibilities of members of parliament. Do they pose as a threat to the constitution in the existence within the parliament?
You know, the army is part of the executive. It's one of the pillars of the state. The army, the police, and other institutions of the state. They are part of the executive arm of government. That's why we have a Minister of Defense. Again, you have a Minister of Internal Affairs in charge of police and prisons. These are state institutions. If they have issues that need representation, they are already taken care of by cabinet. In addition, the president is the commander-in-chief of the security forces. So you cannot say that the army needs a voice in parliament. It has a voice already through the executive. It was a big mistake to consider the army as an affirmative action group that needed representation in the House. If that was the case, then let's also have police and prisons represented in the House. Don't you think they have issues that need to be taken care of? This mistake, you know, people had thought that because of our history and the army having been the biggest disruptor of our democracy, I don't know whether that has changed. We are yet to see whether this has changed or not. The army has been the biggest disruptor of democracy and constitutionalism in this country. People thought that they needed to be on table. And I want to compare with the Kenyan Tanzania, because the debate on army presence in politics or participation in politics begins with the East African mutiny in 1945, which was in all these countries. How did Kenya and Tanzania behave in regard to responding to the mutiny? Kenya and Tanzania took a decision to take the army out of politics and public, confine them in the barracks. And that's how they've managed to progress democratically. Uganda took a reverse decision, thinking that they needed to have the army on table. And since then, the army has been our biggest disruptor of democracy, and it remains to be seen on how the army will behave during the transition. So we can't say that we have crossed the line that the army is no longer disruptor when they champion violence, election violence in the country, when they engage in partisan politics, even when they are prohibited by the Constitution and the Political Parties and Organizations Act. So the army still remains the biggest disruptor of our democracy.
Okay. A quick one, Priscilla. You see, when we are discussing the army comes into parliament as a special interest group. And so if we are to agree that the army, for example, gets out of parliament, that means we have forgotten our history, but also we are blackmailing the line of special interest groups.
So when you say history, what's the history you're relating the army to?
Number one, you have the Minister for Youth, but you still have youth MPs in parliament. You have the Ministry for Elderly, you still have elders in parliament. Now, when we take that line of special interest groups, it is an attack on other interest groups, the youth, the elderly, to be out of parliament. And I don't think in the reforms, if police was also given a consideration, I don't think it would be a bad idea if we think that they have got what they can bring on the table vis-a-vis the history we had. Because the history is what Sarah is telling us, the disruption of democracy. And maybe I would argue that because the army was brought on board, the army is in parliament, the army is really following the proceedings closely. That is why from 1986 up to today, we are moving in a positive direction. And therefore, if we attempt to have them out of the house,
yes,
maybe we are taking a thin line, which can collapse us.
Just a quick interruption, sorry. I think the question that we should answer as Ugandans, and in a honest manner, is why should a government department be an interest group, special interest group, like persons with disabilities?
And that debate is coming your way right after this break. Marion will be giving us a reason as to why or why not there should be an interest group in governance this day.
If there is anyone present who has a reason why these two should not be lawfully married, speak now or forever hold your peace.
On the next episode
is brought to you by...
With 3 delicious flavors in the 300 ml and 500 ml bottles, there's an honor for everyone.
On the next episode...
NTV travelers, I am very excited. I hope you can tell I have so much energy today. And yes, we are in the adventure capital. And you know, you guys, I love adventure. Can you guess where I am? If you are tired of the normal things, come out here. We are going to zipline across 7 different trees. We have so much in store for this episode. We're in Ginger. Let's go!
On the next episode...
With 3 delicious flavors in the 300 ml and 500 ml bottles, there's an honor for everyone. Wefunireka honor at an outlet near you.
Babe, more honor, please. But won't get honor.
Freshness you can taste.
Good morning, Peter.
We believe in ideas that can change the world.
For every dreamer, creator, striver, and believer. At ABSA Corporate and Investment Banking, we are invested in your story, and we invite you to write it with us, because your story matters. ABSA.
YoTV channels up yeyubudde n'okwezza obujja kati nyumirwa mo ku YoTV okuvira ddala ku nnusu 10 nga ne data kw'otadde live radio ne TV filimu empya eziriko bowling extra okulimizi kwa Uganda yenna ne comedy filimu zaffe ennansi n'obuzannyo ku Kibanda Express muto kwe kuli katuni z'abaana ezisingayo zonna. Emipiira gyonna ku YoTV Sports. Downloadinga YoTV app ku Google Play oba App Store onyumirwemo ku YoTV.
The next episode
is brought to you by...
With 3 delicious flavors in the 300 ml and 500 ml bottles, there's an honor for everyone.
On the next episode...
NTV travelers, I am very excited. I hope you can tell I have so much energy today. And yes, we are in the adventure capital. And you know, you guys, I love adventure. Can you guess where I am? If you are tired of the normal things, come out here. We are going to zipline across 7 different trees. We have so much in store for this episode. We're in Ginger. Let's go!
On the next episode...
With 3 delicious flavors in the 300 ml and 500 ml bottles, there's an honor for everyone. Wefunire ka honor at an outlet near you.
Babe, more honor, please. But won't get honor.
Freshness you can take.
All right, it's a bit hot in here, but thanks to the AC, it helps keep things calm. With my guests, Sarah Bireete, we do have Marion Chirabo and Sheikh Kassim Kamugisha. And of course, the hot debate that we were having on the floor is one of the recommendations and reforms was to have the army out of the parliament, to which Sheikh Kassim here was of the view that they are classified as a special interest group, and therefore, if they're not affecting legislation, budget allocation, and service delivery, then they have every right to be there, to which the ladies do have a debate of disagreement. Marian, you were yet to give us your 2 cents.
So we're talking about an interest group. Really, the definition of an interest group is a community or group of individuals who come together because of a shared interest or concern that they have in order to influence government policies. I think the better question would be that, what are those concerns that a government department like the army would have that cannot be addressed through the Minister of Defense, through the Commander-in-Chief, who is the President, and through perhaps for the idea of security forces through the Ministry of Internal Affairs, that all those 3 agents or departments have failed in their mandate to actually represent the interests of this security force, that they themselves have to be there. I think it's a vote of no confidence in the Ministry of Defense. It's a vote of no confidence in the in the President himself. It's a vote of no confidence really in the Ministry of Internal Affairs if the army feels that none of these 3 parties can represent their concerns.
We also
Parliament.
have a Minister for Security.
Minister for Security also. So it means that these people are incompetent. Perhaps we should do away with them, and we say that we will only have the members of Parliament that represent the representatives that represent these people, and we do away with these other ministries that are masquerading.
Sheikh Kassim, what has been the positive impact of having the army in Parliament?
We all agree that our history had turbulations. 1966, you have a gold scandal, which causes a political impasse in the parliament, and the following day you have the army storm the Rubiri, take over, install the prime minister with executive powers. 1971, you have a political impasse, and the following day you have got a coup. In 1980, you have very many issues. 1986, the army takes over. But from 1962 to 71, then to 86, we had the constitutions, which constitutions had not brought on board the military, so that it becomes part of the proceedings. Not forgetting that the military does not contribute, the army does not directly contribute or vote in parliament, but it follows proceedings. And therefore, the framers of the 1995 Constitution, that is the CA delegates, the problems we don't have the answered here. I think we would have been clearly guided on what was their intention, the clear intention of having the army in parliament. But what I can read through is, they had looked at that history, the trends of military takeovers, maybe because they were not part of legislation, not part of the direct governance in parliament, and therefore they felt that because they are not part of legislation, there are mistakes which are being made internally and which they can come in and really solve. And so, from your question, I think from 1995 up to date, when we have the military in parliament, who have been following the deliberations in parliament, maybe guiding in committees, we have had a sustained governance undisrupted for almost 30 years. And to me, I take it as an achievement.
Which sustained governance we would still have had if they were still not in parliament?
That's a speculation, because the history tells us that in 1966, there was a takeover by the military. In 71, there was a takeover by the military. 86, there was a takeover by the military. And there was no sustained governance. And because we had it from 1995 up to date, then the answers become too different.
Okay. All right. Mario, in opposition to the Constitution of 1967, the current Constitution contains a range of powers that are shared between the President and the Parliament, as well as other constitutional bodies. But now there's talk around the credibility and the powers that Parliament has, who's giving them the many powers that they're exercising in most recent times over the things that you have seen. And has our Parliament served Ugandans efficiently by and large as we get into the 12th Parliament, if we can build into that, and in terms of exercising its mandate as it is supposed to be, opposed to what we see today?
Before I answer that question, I think we would be dishonest to say that there has not been a disruption, unless we're looking at the capital of Uganda only and not looking at other parts of Uganda in the world. We do know that there was an insurgence of over 20 years in the north, if I am not mistaken, and where I would say for the people of the north, they haven't enjoyed the peace that you're talking about. When we go to where I come from, for example, in Kasese, we'll also tell you that I think as early as, was it 2010, when there was an attack on the palace, was it? So I don't know if we are talking about maybe Buganda, around in Kampala or Buganda only, but the rest of Uganda would beg to differ about this peace that you're talking about, about this
the insurgents we had earlier were because the military was taking over.
Okay.
But I think we had rebels in northern Uganda and in Kasese side. So that's a different argument vis-a-vis what I
don't think it's a different argument, because all these, even when the NRM came into power, they were first seen as rebels. So it's all about rebels military. So when they're in power, they are military. When they are out of power and they're fighting the power in government, they are considered as rebels. The thing is that they're using guns, they're using violence to come into power. Okay. And with all these rebels that you talk about, their thing was, their aim ultimately was to take over power, isn't it? So when you talk about disruption, I don't see it. I mean, would have been a rebel if Obote had the ability to maybe to fight him before he got to know of the coup. Okay. So that doesn't matter.
Back to the shared power and the current state of constitutionalism.
So when it comes to the separation of powers, I think the disservice to our constitution was really when the term limits and the age limits were removed. Across the world, the presidency has a lot of power, and indeed it does need that power in order to govern. Whoever sits in that chair should have at least enough flexibility over the economy, over, let me say, the cabinet members, over the affairs of the country in order to rule. But in order to check this power and make sure that this person does not misuse it, there are certain limitations that the Constitution will put in. That is age limits. Beyond the certain age, you cannot run. Or term limits, you can only have 2 terms and go away. I'll give you a particular example, like I still give the democracies we aspire to be. I'll give you an example of President Trump when he was still in power. I think he is the president that maybe in most recent US history that we can see that did not adhere at least to the democratic values of the US. And he had started eroding things that they thought they held dear. You could see, and he did this through the appointment of judges on the Supreme Court, who eventually then eroded most of their constitutional laws that they had held sacred for a long time. But how they were able to check him and his seemingly overstretching of power is through, let me say, having credible and legitimate elections that get him out. But then also, if we were to say that he was to be there, maybe he won the next election, there would still be that bar of the term limits. Beyond a certain term, you cannot run. So when you erode and get rid of these checks and balances, you allow whoever is in power to entrench themselves and their power to start to seep into even the other agencies that were supposed to put a check and balance on them. For example, we have seen with the judiciary, the appointment of cadre judges, the infiltration of the Judicial Service Commission that has actually become a puppet more than a commission that is supposed to sieve and make sure that we have credible and independent judges. We have actually even seen it go a further, which is unconstitutional, the appointment of acting judges. And I remember Dr. Kawomba taking that to the Constitutional Court, and the Constitutional Court ruling in their favor. So you start to see that this power becomes so entrenched that it starts to seep, and eventually the whole system is consolidated around this individual. So unfortunately for us, the time when we had to make sure that we put a check and on this thing called the presidency, we did not effectively fight against to protect those safeguards like maybe Burundi did, and therefore we find ourselves in such a situation that the whole system, the presidency has entrenched itself in all parts, whether it is the Electoral Commission, whether it's the judiciary, whether it's the parliament. It has entrenched itself so much that it has no checks anymore, that then the constitution has just become a piece of paper. Today they can decide and do away with certain provision, and there's nothing that anyone will do about it. You will challenge in court, and we have had controversial constitutional decisions that come out, and you clearly see that these judges were after protecting maybe the presidency. So I think we missed it when we allowed those checks to go away. And now we find ourselves in a situation where, again, it will still be the citizenry that will have to step up and say, you know, enough is enough. Let's take back our power. Let's defend what little we have of this legal regime and rebuild again under maybe a new presidency, a new president, a civilian government. Let us fight to demilitarize our politics. But we are still fighting. We hope that one day we will succeed.
Bireete, among the good qualities of a good constitution is that it should not easily be changed, but more so it should bear the aspirations of the people it's intended to govern and protect. At the end of the day, we look into our history that is marred by a lot of human rights violations, and it seems to be a non-ending conversation and a building one in the different faces of the different leaders that we've had in the country. It begs the question, the 1995 constitution that we stand upon today, has it achieved any significant amendments that have been done and placed? Have they had any significant change, especially to the last person, the Ugandan?
Well, the 1995 Constitution, unfortunately, almost all amendments have taken away the power. We are doing research that we'll release on Constitutional Day, Uganda's Constitutional Day, which is 8th October, on how the Constitution has been amputated or changed by the regime without the knowledge of the people. When you look at the original 1995 Constitution, promulgated on 8th October 1995, all amendments have weakened it, especially taking away the spirit of the Constitution that Marion talked about, to the term limits and age limits. And once you undress the spirit of the Constitution and take it out, you are remaining with a shell of a Constitution. And in terms of governance, we just have a mere shell. If you go to the preamble of the Constitution under paragraph 3, you know, a permanent and durable Constitution. Those words are in capital letters in that preamble. The framers of the Constitution had envisaged a durable Constitution that they bestowed upon the prosperity of this nation and upon future generations. That Constitution had a transition arrangement for power. You can even go back to the terms of reference for the Odoch Commission. There were 2 terms of reference for the Odoch Commission. Incorporate views, wishes, and values of the people. That's why they went up to sub-county level with consultations. Ensure a mechanism for peaceful handover of power. 2 terms of reference for that Odoch Commission. The views of the people were corrected and then processed into the Constitution. But also this Constitution had an arrangement for peaceful handover of power through term limits, through credible, free and fair elections that are entrenched under Article 1 of the Constitution, but also through age limit. So when the CA did a disservice to this country by failing to entrench term limits. And when you talk to some of the people, for example, Dr. Matembe that was on the Odoch Commission and then the Constituent Assembly, they think they were hoodwinked, thinking that, you know, there was well intention from the president, because the first proposal was to entrench. And then in their consultations, they were told, no, it will be only a mad person that would tamper with this, because that's why we fought. So then the inevitable happened in 2005, and the mad person happened. And then the term limits were gone. The age limits are gone. We don't have credible, free and fair elections. So when you go to that arrangement for peaceful handover of power, we are remaining with the one leg of that transition, a possible peaceful transition, but also that is not effective because we don't have credible elections. The Supreme Court of Uganda is on record 3 times for having ruled that the elections in this country fall short of what is envisaged in the Constitution. So when you have this kind of, you know, turbulent situation, like, you know, Marion said, there are 46 articles in the Constitution that talk about the president's power. We have an imperial presidency. The framers of the Constitution had envisaged a situation where one individual would exercise this much power only for a maximum of 10 years. But we have a permanent presidency that was never envisaged in the Constitution. You have one person exercising too much power in perpetuity. Nobody even knows when he will end.
Okay. Sheikh Kassim, have there been some significant amendments done, and what benefit have they had to Ugandans?
A quick one. In Uganda, power belongs to the people as per Article 1. And shall be exercised as prescribed in the Constitution. So the people of Uganda go to an election every 5 years and in capital letters write their wish that our next president shall be President Museveni, for example, as per 2021. So whether we had term limits or not, I don't see it as an issue vis-a-vis presidency, because the people always decide. And that's why it was not entrenched that people shall not tamper with that article. So, and of course, Supreme Courts world over have always been petitioned to guide on presidential elections. That is why Al Gore versus George Bush in 2000, and substantiality test is always a subjection. And when you pass it, you become a president. So the issue of having Supreme Court guiding is normal because that is why it is there. Back to your question of whether we have had amendments and if there are celebrations. In 2005, I'll start from there. One of the amendments was to have multi-party dispensation, whereby people were to move from the movement system and they go into multi-party dispensation, whereby a person takes his own route in terms of his political ideology. And that therefore gave back the people of Uganda their legitimate democracy to vote their orientations, their manifestos for governance. And to me, that's a serious achievement, because before we were in one system. And that also brought in another amendment of leader of opposition, which we didn't have from 1986 and 89 NRC to 2005. So you have leader of opposition who consolidates, who rallies opposition in parliament to give alternative views. And which alternative views in the long run are for the better service delivery of the people of Uganda. Right. And finally, you have the most recent of General Kaindotafiri of 2017, whereby the government was to acquire to acquire infrastructure, properties of people for infrastructure development, to facilitate infrastructure development in the country. Okay. Now, to me, those are the achievements which Ugandans have got, and those are, because time is not our best ally, those are the few we could talk about.
All right.
But I don't think there is an argument outside from the people of Uganda that really we have not benefited from amendments. But there could be other voices which are accommodated because it's a democracy. People have to speak. And
Kassim Kamugisha, thank you so much for your 2 cents. Marion Chirabo, thank you so much for your input. And Dr. Sarah Bireete, unfortunately, we are out of time, but here at Morning at NTV, we're going to be having this conversation as a continued conversation, because I know that many stakeholders have been calling for constitutional reforms and electoral reforms ahead of the 2026 elections. So as we generate into that electoral cycle, here at Morning at NTV, we're equally going to be generating more discussions around this. Should there be reforms, or should we simply focus on implementing what is on the primary paper? Well, that brings us to the end of Morning at NTV.